for the duration of the workshop, with the exception of the facilitators. That would be Tony.R, Joe C, and myself, Joanne C. This is not a conventional AA meeting where we share experience, strength, and hope with each other. This is a big book study workshop, the purpose of which is to take members of AA through the program of recovery as it's laid out in our basic text, Alcoholics Anonymous, or more commonly known as the Big Book. We will not be referencing any other literature or versions of the 12 steps. Our aim is to help educate and challenge your beliefs about the program of recovery so we might sift through some of the inaccuracies that circulate within our fellowship. Our aim is to challenge current beliefs by comparing them to what our basic text says. We simply wish to educate those who want to know more about the program of recovery. You can ask questions, perhaps maybe later on in the chat. We have the chat feature shut off for now. It was serving to be more of a distraction and bait for people who were ill-intentioned in the workshop. Anyone behaving inappropriately in their video screen will be removed from the workshop, and you will not be permitted to return, so keep it clean. Joe, do you want to open us up with the set-aside prayer?
Thanks, Joanne. Joe, recovered alcoholic.
Hey, Joe.
Set-aside prayer. Dear God, please set aside everything I think I know about myself, this book, my illness, these steps, and especially about you, dear God, so that I might have an open mind and a new experience with all these things. Please help me to see the truth.
Thank you. Tony?
Right on, recovered alcoholic. My name's Tony. Did you want to talk about the 7th edition now or later?
We can just talk about it later.
Okay. Where we're at how it works. We're going to go through it in great detail. Hopefully you got a pen, piece of paper, a marker, and the worksheets. If you don't have the worksheets, you can download them after. We'll take you through the highlights. If you have a pen, you can make little notes or kind of hit some highlight. We're going to probably look at this a lot differently than most of you have been shown through this. And I was shown this 31 years ago, and then I've developed more along the lines of the intent and the design of this thing. So it's really interesting. There's a lot of generic approaches to this. We're going to really look at what the book says, right? Because what's the purpose? We're hoping to have a certain kind of experience. We've made that decision that I need to have this psychic change or spiritual experience. Otherwise, I'm going to be doomed to an alcoholic death. That's what they kind of talked about on page 63. They talked about here the conclusion of everything that we kind of read on page 62, 63 talked about. I have to have a certain experience to be free from self. Unless I get this freedom from self, I'm going to go back to drinking. It's just a matter of time before my illness takes me out again. And I've agreed in step 1 that alcoholism is above my pay grade, before the steps and after the steps. I've agreed that it's kind of beyond my ability to deal with. That's why step 2 makes more sense. It talks about there is a solution to this problem, and the solution is spiritual in nature. If I'm willing to apply these principles from steps, or the steps from steps 3 to 11, I'll undergo this change and allow me to have a psychic change or spiritual experience. This experience, right, that allow me to recover from alcoholism. So on page 63, they talk about what this kind of looked like when they sincerely took this position of going through this course of action. A lot of people think on the summary on the top of page 63 is the step 3 promises. Actually, it's a summary of the experience of the course of action that they had as the result of going through this course of action. Now they're saying, if you want what we have, we're going to begin that process. So we do the 3rd step prayer. The 3rd step prayer is, again, a summary of an idea of what's available to us if we're willing to do the rest of the course of action. Because if I was able to experience these things in step 3, it'd be a 3-step program. The decision is, do I want to live on spiritual, be doomed to an alcoholic death, or find a spiritual solution? Our confirmation is yes. We do the 3rd step prayer. I want this kind of change that's available to me through this course of action. So what do I need to get in order to obtain this change? I need to get access to this power. Because what's my dilemma? Lack of power that we read about on page, 40? 45, they talked about this lack of power, and where was I to find this power? They talked about it in 55, deep down within. I didn't come up with that idea. That's their idea. That's our understanding of what we need to get access to. It's the common understanding of what our solution is. If you want what we have, this is how we get access to it, right? To this power. It's deep down within. We're going to need to remove the blocks so you can have your own experience with what we've already had. Right? And so they talked about that in the spiritual appendix in the back of the book. All our members, with few exceptions, have tapped into this inner resource of strength, confirming where this thing is, deep down within. All I need to do is be willing to go through this course of action to get what they got. It's already laid out for me, because what is the main purpose of this book is to enable me to find a power greater than myself, which will solve my problem. It doesn't help solve my problem, it solves my problem. And once the problem is removed, alcoholism is removed, then I'm left with the human element that I apply these spiritual principles to, where I get a daily reprieve. So let's start from page 63, and we'll start off. Where did you want to start off? Might as well start off with the third step prayer and the introduction, and we'll kind of go through this. What do you think?
Sounds great.
Joe, we good?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Everybody good? Everybody present? Right on.
You ready?
31 years ago. Okay, go ahead.
Many of us said to our Maker as we understood him, I offer myself to thee, to build with me and to do with me as thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, so that I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. May I do thy will always.
So we see this is an idea, and it's a summary of the course of action. It's a conclusion. By the time you get to step 11, you'll fulfill this idea. And you'll understand the basis of this prayer. Right now, it's an idea. Right? And as I go through this course of action, it'll make more sense to me, become more personal, and I'll fulfill these ideas that the first 100 men and women since thousands who went before me has experienced. So I'm hoping to have this experience. Because if I was able to have this experience now, would I need to do the rest of the steps? No. So the whole point is, this is what I'm hoping to obtain. Go ahead.
We found it very desirable to take this spiritual step with an understanding person such as our wife, best friend, or spiritual advisor. But it is better to meet God alone than with one who might misunderstand. The wording was, of course, quite optional, so long as we expressed the idea, voicing it without reservation.
What idea? This relationship, to get access to power that will relieve me and allow me to obtain a life that I've always looked for. What we talked about in the promises, but if you didn't know what the promises are, hopefully you've read through it and got a good idea of what's available to us, right? So the wording's quite optional, so long as we express the idea. I need this course of action to obtain this change so I can have the experience, right?
This was only a beginning, though, if honestly and humbly made, an effect, sometimes a very great one, was felt at once. Next, we launched out on a course of vigorous action.
What does next mean? Next from what? From our decision. We're going to confirm our decision. A confirmation of our decision is step 11. What confirms our decision in step 3 is step 4. If I don't start step 4, then I haven't really done a decision in step 3, have I? If I did step 3 every day from now for the rest of my life, that's a nice way of saying you're really doing nothing. Isn't it? Because we're making a decision here to do the rest. Do I need to do the rest of the work, or don't I need to do the rest of the work? Because if step 3 was the solution, then there would be no other work necessary, right? Remember,
It'd be a really thin book, yeah.
Pretty thin book. Remember, the doctor talked about we're a little maladjusted, full flight from reality, and downright mental defectives. Nobody in this group, fine-looking bunch of people, nobody in this group has problems with their thinking. I could tell just by the expressions on everybody's face. We're miracles of mental health. Can I get a show of hands? Sorry. Right on. So,
everybody should have both hands.
Yeah, you have the right to remain silent. This is what anybody new should put up new hands. Help. Okay, so remember, because on the previous page, they talked about driven by 100 forms of fear and self-delusion. I'm the only one who don't know when I'm in that state, right? So what makes me aware of that state is the consequences of the conflict with people, places, and things. And then I review my life. How did I get here? How did this happen? How are these emotions, feelings, and these things, these bondages of self driving me? It's always in hindsight, not in foresight, right? I don't have the ability to see the bus coming. It's always after the wheels go over the back of me, I kind of go, oh, shouldn't have been on the road again, right? Okay.
Next, we launched out on a course of vigorous action, the first step of which is a personal house cleaning.
First step. Why would they? First step of what? First step of bringing about this change. The first step of bringing about this change is actually step 4. Because step 3 is an idea. It was but a beginning. Unless at once followed by a strenuous effort to face and be rid of the things that have been blocking us. They talk about here, right? It's just a beginning. What does a beginning mean? It's a start. It's not a conclusion. Remember that guy in one of the stories, his life was, he made a beginning. But he failed to enlarge in his spiritual life, and then he got loaded again. So a lot of us mistaken feeling better for getting better. A lot of us mistaken that feeling of hope as a spiritual experience. 2 different things altogether. Because if I could have this hope and spiritual experience in step 3, what most of us try to do is talk ourselves out of doing the steps. Nobody in this group, right? Okay, so, and it'll confirm that, right? So we'll start next we learn stuff, and it'll confirm that we really try to avoid this whole thing, right? Remember back
with, add a little bit to that, Tony?
Yeah.
You know, and what Tony was saying is how we can trick ourselves by that. You want to know how easy it is to get a job, to get a car, and to get your money back when you're not drinking? It's pretty easy. But we mistaken those promises for the promises, and our promises got nothing to do with that. So that's kind of what we were just talking about there. We can mistake just getting abstinent for doing good, but it's very easy to attain those things when you're not drinking.
They're talking about an effect, sometimes a very great one, that's experienced when making a decision in step 3. But it's vital and a crucial step, but it can have little permanent effect, right? Yeah. Unless it's followed up by a vigorous course of action.
See, I love that word, unless.
Yeah, I wasn't that well when I got here. I know it's hard to believe looking at me and hearing me today, but I was kind of like, cheese off my cracker, not even on the same plate kind of thing, right? Like just totally like way out there. So my sponsor explained it to me this way. Step 3 is like seeing the girl of your dreams and she agrees to go out with you on a date. You'd be very excited about that, but she never calls you again. That's what step 3 is. What confirms that she needs to call you. That great feeling, wow, things like, hey, she said yes, she's going to go out with me, right? That's like step 3. What confirms it is the call, right? I need to make the call, or she needs to make the call, right? Like that feeling's not going to last long after 3 weeks, right? Maybe she's not calling. Okay, anyways. The getting now is some of you is picking up what I'm putting down. Okay.
Yeah. Mostly the guys.
yeah, mostly the guy. Easy. So, and also, this is where they talk about the statistics. Remember the statistics? Of alcoholics who came to AA and really tried. Really tried what? Really tried this course of action. 50% got sober at once and remained that way. Some after a few relapses. So they're gonna do a disclaimer here on the next page. Some of us will try to avoid doing this, but what will get your attention again is another relapse, because what's the step 1 promise is relapse. That's why I need to pursue this solution. Go ahead.
So our decision was a vital and crucial step. It could have little permanent effect unless at once followed up by strenuous effort to face and to be rid of the things in ourselves which had been blocking us.
Notice it didn't say work on the things that have been blocking us. Right? What does it say?
Our liquor was but a symptom.
No, it says to be rid of.
Rid of. It didn't say work on. A lot of people do a 4-step and I got this thing, I'm working on all this stuff. If you're still working on you, then you miss the whole idea of this stuff, because the problem is beyond our pay grade.
Oh, yeah.
right? That's what we're convinced of. The more I work on me, the worse matters get. Any show of hands here?
Woo!
And anybody ever do a full day of working on themselves and thought, boy, that was a great day spent? That's the being convinced part. Like, like this isolation part, you really get to see what you're dealing with. Right? All this alone time, we're really not alone, are we? Let's move on. Go ahead, Joanne. Hit us up. Which many of us never attempted. Right? We need to be convinced of the need to do this. Otherwise, you won't do it.
Our liquor was but a symptom, so we had to get down to causes and conditions. Therefore, we started upon a personal inventory. This was step 4.
So now they're going to give us an outline here, right, of what kind of new kind of process we need within our thinking. Because our process, the way we process things, the way we look at things, aren't sufficient enough to see the truth about things. We know what consequences are, we know what pain is, we know what conflict is, but what created it. So most of us write out our life stories in thinking we're doing an inventory. But it's not our life, it's not the 90% of our life story that causes our problem. It's the 10% that causes the problem. Most of us can't see that with our own thinking. So this next kind of introduction here is they're going to say, we're going to give you a formula that you need to incorporate within your thinking so you could see you better under spiritual magnifying glass, right? This next part is very, very important, okay?
Business, which takes no regular inventory, usually goes broke. Taking a commercial inventory is a fact-finding and fact-facing process. It is an effort to discover the truth about the stock in trade. One object is to disclose damaged or unsalable goods, to get rid of them promptly and without regret.
That's good news, right? Because if you haven't been able, if your business is failing, you need a new way of looking at it so you can be successful. So these people, when people look at these 4 steps and they go, oh, the 4 steps, most of them are doing an immoral, beat yourself up process. That's not what this is about. It's about finding the truth about the stock and trade so I can have a new experience and a new life beyond anything I could ever imagine. But I need to be able to look at stock honestly to see what's driving me. If I don't see what's driving me, these 100 forms of fear and self-delusions, and they're still making themselves look good to me, but the outcome is not very good because I'm already convinced any life driven by self, right? I'm not making these decisions. These decisions are being made for me. I'm a sum result of the drive, the internal drive, right? Anybody have that problem here? So I need to find out what's driving this thing, right? So I could find a new way of operating, right? Go ahead.
If the owner of the business is to be successful, he cannot fool himself about values. We did exactly the same thing with our lives. We took stock honestly. First, we searched out the flaws in our makeup, which caused our failure. Being convinced that self, manifested in various ways, was what had defeated us, we considered its common manifestations.
So they're going to take the root stuff that causes us our biggest problems. They're talking about there's a lot of different ways it kind of manifests itself in 100 forms of this way, that. They're going to take its common root, right, and give you a recipe on how to deal with these specific things. And then once you have that recipe as a working part of the mind and applying spiritual principles to it, then you could apply that same recipe to any problem or any concern that you have. Does that kind of make sense? They're going to give you a new way of looking at things, this inventory process of being able to go through the corridors in your mind and take stock honestly what's happening up there or in your consciousness. They're going to give you a new way of going, like I don't know if anybody's worked on new jobs where you had to do inventory. Each specific group or company or people have ways of doing inventory once a year to see what's selling, what's working, what isn't working. This is kind of now we're going to use that same kind of within inside of ourselves. We don't have that, so they're going to say, let us take you through it to show you how to make it personal to you, right? It's common manifestations. What does that mean? Common manifestations. Go
Are you
ahead.
asking me?
Yeah.
How does self manifest itself? How does self show up in our daily life? How does it cause our failure, right? Like, what are these? That's the question they're being asked. First, we searched out the flaws in our makeup, which caused our failure. How do we specifically do that? We need to know how self manifests itself in various ways. The first example they give us is resentment.
Yeah.
So now we're going to look at this very carefully. Remember, when you change a word, you change the meaning. And a lot of people has looked at this and they've changed the wording or the meaning, and they've just kept on. It's gotten tread or credibility within the fellowship, and they've changed the whole meaning of something. So people start to say, "Oh, we have a spiritual disease." It doesn't say that, right? You got to read what it says, right? Most people miss it. So let's go over it slowly. Resentment is the number one offender.
It destroys more alcoholics than anything else. From it stem all forms of spiritual disease.
From what? From the resentment. From the resentments form all forms of spiritual disease. So I'm poisoning myself. And when I'm full of anger and resentment, it kind of goes in every area of my life. So it's not alcoholism causing my spiritual disease, it's the resentment. Resentment is the number one offender. It's the human condition. Right? Anybody know non-alcoholics with resentments? So it's the human condition. But with us, it kills us. Right? So I need to find a way of dealing with it. So it says, from it. From what? From the resentment, the poisoning of self. From it stems all forms of spiritual disease. From what? From the resentment. Interesting, eh? How many people found that for the first time? Interesting in that wording, right? So a lot of people read that and go, oh, I have a spiritual disease. No, I don't have a spiritual disease. What I have is a sickness based on resentments that my inability to shake, get rid of, or deal with. Right? So they talk about we became ill, crushed by self-imposed crisis, right? So what happens, alcoholism keeps on governing us. We warp our thinking and our lives, right? Remember the condition Bill got into? That was a result of his inability to get sober. And as time went on, he got worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. Why? Because all these things kept on compounding. So he had his alcoholism and his human condition, and are we good?
Yeah. From it stem all forms of spiritual disease, for we have been not only mentally and physically ill, we have been spiritually sick.
So they're saying that we've been spiritually sick spirit, right? Which really, they're trying to find a nice way of saying something common, and language that we could all understand. But what we really are is separated from our spirit. That's what we become sick as a result of separation from this power. Right? Our human condition becomes ill. Does that kind of make sense? So they call it a spiritual sick. Our spirit becomes sick, not the power that we're seeking is sick. There's two different things. There's our condition, and then there's the power we're seeking. The power we're seeking is finite. There's no problem with that. Once we get access to it, it regenerates, it fixes it. It's like having a flashlight with all bad batteries in it, right? The light still works, you just change the batteries.
That's probably the best way you could explain that right there.
Right? The light works. There's the separation from it, right? Okay.
When the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically.
Why do they use the word malady again? When the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. Why did they not, when the spiritual sickness, why did they call it a malady?
So we've, do you want them to answer?
No, it's just food for thought. You can answer it on a piece of paper beside you, but we already understand malady means it's really hard to define. Right? It exhibits itself in all different ways, this underlying condition that we have. That's why they're saying we'll consider the common manifestations. This is what the common thread to it is. But how many different fellowships are there out there?
Hundreds.
Hundreds. So people have found something for their ailment, the human condition. They've found some form of solution that's turned around and worked against them. So our human ailment. So you can maybe feel like Joe was saying, we can feel better. We get a job, right? We get a job, we get money, we get a relationship, and that makes you feel better. But then something else starts showing up somewhere else because the ailment is still there. So we look at it with our human eyes or based on our instincts, and we go, I should be feeling good. Anybody ever been there? I should be feeling good. I should be, look in my life, I should be really happy and great. But I have this kind of ache, this kind of loneliness, this thing that I just can't seem to reach on my own. That's that malady, because when we look at it, it's really hard to define and see what it is. So they're saying, we're going to give you this solution, and it's hard to explain because it's a phenomena. It's an unexplainable event, but we've all experienced it. And when we apply the solution, we seem to get freedom from it. We have this new happiness, joy, peace, and contentment. Well, how do you explain? It's really hard to explain, but this is what it looks like. This is God's portfolio. Every meeting we go to, and we hear all these people have this new light. When Bill seen that light in Ebby, he didn't need to explain it. He's seen that there was something different about this guy. Right? Okay.
In dealing with resentments, we set them on paper.
Wow. So what's after paper? Period. So here's the interesting part. We listed people, institutions, and principles with whom we're angry. So you take, this is complicated. You know what? Empty piece of paper. Everybody see this? This is the hard part. Probably you fold it in half. That's the complicated part, because we get people, well, how do I fold it? Fold it in half, right? Okay, you fold it in half. You sit back, you get a pen. Where's a pen, paper, pencil, right? You put the piece of paper in front of you. So I got this in front of me now, right? I got a pen. I sit quietly for a second. I do the third step prayer. Just practice for a second. Everybody sit quietly for a second and do the third step prayer, right? You get centered. That's the whole purpose, is this connection. So you get back, you're back in the present. Then you ask yourself, what it was explaining, who you pissed off with, who you angry with, who were you angry with, write down whoever you're angry, write down whatever comes to mind. Anybody have something come to mind? How many people had something come to mind? So you could only think of one thing at a time, so you put it down. So Bob, Brenda, the police, ambulance, the grade 7 teacher, the high school teacher, the principal in grade 11, my girlfriend in grade 6, my girlfriend in grade 11. There's no age to it. What happens is my conscience will start unloading stuff that I still have attachment to. How many people are thinking more than one thing? So what happens is you write down whatever comes to mind, just a list of people, places, and things with whom you're angry. And so what happens is your brain will start talking to you. It's a simple instruction. Is that not a simple instruction? How many people would say that's a simple instruction? You'll see how simple it is when you start doing it. Your brain will start talking to you. Well, you're not really mad at that person. You've already dealt with that. You've already looked at that. How many people have that kind of thinking? Well, if it came to mind, that means it's not dealt with, is it? That means there's something in your subconscious that's still, and then what happens is the narrator, self, will try to take control again. And God's will for us is do this course of action to find out the things that have been blocking you off from source, right? So how we get to do now is the hard part. We get to be an observer of how we operate, how our thinking tries to out-talk us or outsmart us, or kind of creates a diversion from us seeking a solution to self. So now we get to see there is a difference between me and my thinking. There's my thinking, and then there's the observer. I used to think they were one and the same. So as I make this list, I went through it and I started putting all these lists, and I got to like 110, right? And then it was kind of like, then my sister came to mind, and I was lying down, I was going to bed, and I was thinking, my sister, and I said, I'm not putting my sister's name down. I'm not mad at my sister. And I argued with that for like 2 days. about the idea of putting somebody down instead of just putting them. So I put them down on the list, and what that did was unlock a door where there was 20 names behind that. So I don't have to see why it is. I just get to see what I'm still carrying in my attachment and these things that are still at the subconscious level. Remember, they talk about root and branch. I mean, something that's a root is below the surface, is my subconsciousness. If I'm going to be free, I need to see what it is. And some of it may sound stupid. So what? If it comes to mind, what do? Write it down. How free do you want to be? So they're going to show you an exercise, and some of it may be even crazy. I remember, like I've done like in and out for 11 years, and I did life stories, I did counseling, I did therapy, I've been in treatment twice, they did groups like on and on and on and on. But when I did this process, it was the first time I sat quietly and allowed my conscious to come to the surface. And what happened was, in all that time, this guy, what came to mind was the guy with the blue cap. It may sound kind of weird. I put it down, the blue cap. This is the first time in 11 years that this person came to mind when doing inventory. Because the first time I did a life story, I was 16, right? And all through that stuff. But the first time I did this process, I was 27. So 11 years of in and out. And I went through this because I made the decision to go to any links. So what the blue cap was, it was kind of really funny, was when we get into it, well, at the next stage. So I put the blue cap down, and then as we go through it, I'll explain that as an example. Okay? And then what do we do once we have this list? So if I start reliving and re-feeling, is that the purpose of this? Joe, is it?
Sorry, we turned on the chat there. I got a little distracted.
Okay, so
sorry, Joe.
So it's not about re-feeling, reliving. It's about finding out about the truth in stock. So if I still start reliving the story or re-feeling, wouldn't that be the bondage and difficulties of self? Wouldn't it be? Right? Because the story's not the same anymore. 15 years later, it's a different story. I'm stuck to the story and all that emotional baggage that comes to it. I'm used to, anybody remember LPs where you pile them up? Remember that? You party, you get going, you put the LPs on, and then once it played one record, it'd go and then play the next record, then the next record, and then what do? You turn it over and do the other side. And then when you do that, and then you turn it over and do, we stick to the story, we don't interrupt it. So here they're saying, do the third step prayer when you start re-feeling, revisiting, reliving. Be an observer. Step back from it emotionally. Shut the volume down in your brain. Do the third step prayer. And move on to the next part of exercise. Did you want to add anything to that? Do you want?
No, I'm good.
Okay, so now what do we do with this list? So now we have this list right? We have this list, and you'll see the importance of this, okay?
So that list, for anybody who's got the worksheets, is found in the second booklet, and Tony just held up resentment. So we're going to be discussing that. If you got the booklet or the sheets, you might want to have a look.
In dealing with resentments, we set them on paper. We listed people, institutions, or principles with whom we were angry.
Angry, pissed off with, we were pissed off with, anybody comes to mind, right? If they come to mind, just write them down. Joe's probably coming to mind. Joanne's probably coming to mind, but not me. Okay, go ahead.
We asked ourselves why we were angry.
Well, isn't that interesting? Anybody don't know why they're pissed off at somebody? Well, yeah, we know. So, this is interesting. So in the first column here, at the top of the list, say I've done them all. So we'll go to mom's always a good one. Anybody ever mad at mom? Nobody here, right? Everybody loves their moms. Mom or dad. So here. So in the first column, I put mom. Just one name. I don't move on from there. In the next column, I ask myself why I was mad. You see on page 65, it says, we're usually as defined as this example. I'm resentful at Mr. Brown, but I'm going to put mom. Right? And then in the next column, you see these columns here? You got these columns that go down here. In the next column, You see, it says Mr. Brown is his 1, 2, 3. His attention to my wife, told my wife of my mistress, Mr. Brown needs his ass kicked. So, sorry. His attention to my wife, told my wife of my mistress, Brown may get my job at the office, right? So
Mr. Brown probably already has a restraining order.
Yeah. So you notice that it fills up the box and moves into the next box. So you put 2 per box, but just short form, right? So then as you go through this, you can fill up 1 page. But most people fill in the first column with all the names. What happens is then it restricts you in the next column. Does that make sense? So here there's an example. So with my mom, I could have like 6 or 7 different boxes here with items, and not the story, just the point. So we get to the guy with the blue cap. So I put the blue cap up here, and then I put beside it was German Shepherd. Anybody understand what that is? No, I understand what it is. So when I look at it, it refreshes my memory of the story. Right away, it gets me back attached to that person, place, or thing. So when you look at my story, you may not know what it is, but I know what it is. So it says, and then the gang. So it was the shepherd, the gang, school, bullies. So what happened was in the story when I did my 5th was I was trying to get home before the older gang in Lakeshore, in Parkdale, where I grew up in Toronto. I was trying to get home before the older kids got a hold of me. So I was up the laneway. I just about got home, and he jumped on top of me, started pounding me. The dog next door was an old police dog that I was friends with. He jumped the fence and grabbed the kid by the face. Right? They put the dog down. I never thought about it after that moment. I shut myself off from that moment. I never carried it, never thought about it, never anything. So this time, by putting the blue cap down, even though it seemed insignificant when I first put the list down, I realized, wow, look at this. I was probably 7 years old when that happened. Look at that. All those years, 27 years later, for the first time it came up, because I put all that other stuff down, my consciousness let me know I was still carrying that stuff in there. Interesting, eh? So, anyways, okay, so then I go through all the names. And so I put the name, I go through all the causes. When I've done my list, I should have a good list of people, places, and things, and causes. Does that kind of make sense? Any questions or confusion around that, you can ask Joe and we'll bring it up again. So now what do? I got the name here, all the causes, next name, all the causes, next name, all the causes. Now what do I do with that?
We listed people, institutions, or principles with whom we were angry. We asked ourselves why we were angry. In most cases, it was found that our self-esteem, our pocketbooks, our ambitions, our personal relationships, including sex, were hurt or threatened. So we were sore. We were burned up.
And we see all that stuff on the next column, the 3rd column, right? So anybody need social instincts? What's that? So this is on the worksheets. So I didn't know what this stuff was, but self-esteem and personal relationships. Did you want to explain that, Joanne?
You want me to explain self-esteem and personal relationships?
Well, under the social instinct, we'll kind of go across it, right?
Yeah. I'm just being shaky. Sorry.
Well, you're on the list. You're on here. I'm just going to add to that, okay?
So everybody has the basic instinct to be social to varying degrees. We all want to be a part of or in the midst of and have connections with other people, some more than others. The first column, self-esteem, would be what esteem do I hold myself in? Thoughts of self, my relationship with self, and then personal relationships are the relationships I have with other people. And in this context, we're thinking, so we were sore, we were burned up. Which one of these is being hurt or threatened? Is the esteem that I hold myself in, is that being hurt or threatened? Is a personal relationship being hurt or threatened? Does that work?
Yeah, and you can get a better idea. So self-esteem is how I feel about me and how I think other people feel about me. Will it affect my self-esteem? Personal relationships would also affect my social instinct, right? Like if I had warrants for my arrest, would that affect my personal relationships? On and on. Like personal relationship is my interaction with people, places. It could be even organizations, the government, my personal interaction or fear with these people because of what they represent. It would affect my personal relationships, right?
If it's a person I'm feeling resentful towards, perhaps I have felt like they've been hoarding in on a personal relationship. If I feel like they've been gossiping behind my back, that would affect my self-esteem. These are just common examples.
Yeah, like when I had the police on there, and they were always picking on me everywhere I went. Do you think that would affect my self-esteem? All the teachers, all these people. So I feel, right? So what I do is go from the top of the list all the way through all the pages. So if I have 30 pages, I just do the self-esteem and I go through all the pages and I listen to my intuition. Is it yes or no? Did it affect it? If I'm unsure, then I can put a little star there, and in my 5th step, I could revisit it. And then I go down the next one, personal relationship. Did this resentment and this cause affect my personal relationships? Right? So with that dog situation, do you think it affected my personal relationship with the owner and the people around me? Without realizing it, yeah, because the shame, guilt, and all that stuff. So I see these two things go hand in hand for a lot of them. And I go through all the way through all the list. And the reason I do that is because then if I want to cross the page, I'd have to change my mind 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 times. By the time I get to the third person, I'll just start checking it. Because remember, I need to get down to cause and condition, fact-finding, fact-facing process. I need to see what's driving me and what's floating my boat, what's making my decisions for me. What is these things that I need to discover of the fact-finding, fact-facing process? I need to discover about the truth about the stock and trade. What's driving me? What are these 100 forms of fear and self-delusion? What is the underlying root to these things that are making my decisions for me? Because I think I'm making my decisions, but my decisions are already made by the time I'm involved in it.
This is how self is manifesting itself in your own life. This is your own personal inventory. This is the problems arising out of self, specifically for you.
And then we go through the social, sex instinct. A lot of people, security instinct. Anybody need that explained? Right? The things that we hold, like Joe was talking about earlier, material, the things that make me feel secure. Like when I start thinking, at least I got this money, I got this job, when I'm feeling a little fear, I look at resources outside of myself to make me feel secure.
Well, not even, it could be something more specific than that. Perhaps maybe it's an individual you think is lobbying for your job or trying to get you fired, right? Where we commonly don't look at our own behavior on how our job is on the line. We look to other people to be responsible for it. So that would be a material instinct, right? In security, these are the things that make me feel secure in my own life, being able to make a living, having personal relationships, all of these things.
It sounds like podium talk. So it's like I go to the gym every day, I do yoga every day, I'm doing all these things, I'm getting a new Dior purse, I'm getting Gucci slippers, I'm getting this, I'm making money, I'm doing this, and you're getting all these outside things to make an inside problem be eradicated, and it's insufficient.
But it's more specific than it's what's being hurt or threatened here, right? Yeah. How is this problem arising out of self, not from other people, but what part of self is being hurt or threatened or affected here?
Yeah, why am I resentful at these people? So then the next one, which is interesting, is sex instinct, acceptable and hidden. I didn't know what the difference was. It's acceptable is it's okay between me and the engaging person. I nearly said person, place, or thing, right? But we'll keep it, like my partner or the person that I'm kind of okay with. That would be acceptable. Hidden would be if anybody what I feel embarrassed if people found out about it. So this was the ongoing kind of theme that my sponsor, the guys, because it took me a lot to understand this, says if I was married now on my honeymoon and everybody, and people says, oh, Tony, had confirmed his relationship last night, I'd be like, it'd be a little, who cares, right? That would be acceptable. The hidden part was they had a sheep involved. There'd be something that I wouldn't want other people to know. So right away, that one thing would make it embarrassing, or I wouldn't want other people to know about it. So that's the hidden part. It's like being involved with the neighbor's wife. Me and her were okay about it, but it was hidden to everybody else. Does that kind of make sense? Hidden would there be consequences, shame, guilt, or remorse if other people found out about it? So hidden, our hidden conduct. Nobody in this group, I know that much, right? Okay. So then ambitions, or anything that would interfere with my hopes for myself socially, security, or sexually in the future, right? So when I was going out with Kim, who was on the list, and her ex would show up, I would interfere with all my instincts, my social, my security, and my, right? Because he's trying to get her back, I'm trying to keep her, there's a conflict. Does that kind of make sense?
It's a full house of self.
Whole lot of self. Okay, so now we got all this list all done, right? We've gone over to the third column. We see that this is what self is. Column 3 is what drives me. That's what my life is made out of. This is my instincts. These are the unmanageability that they talk about in the second half of step 1. Right? These things that I try to find comfort in that I can't manage or create. And then inevitably I look for a drink to cause a sense of ease and comfort to escape these things that are eating my lunch for me. Anybody in this group? What's causing me depression? What's causing me anxiety? What's causing me all these sleepless nights or anticipation and anxiety stems from one of these areas. Well, isn't that interesting? I'm starting to see things a little differently. Okay?
We went back through our lives. Nothing counted but thoroughness and honesty.
Honesty about what's happening in my brain. A lot of people think, oh, was this honest? If you believe it happened like that, or if you believe this thing happened, because there's a lot of my story, I don't know if I was actually there for that part or not, but it's a reoccurring thought or memory. Anybody have that? Like, did this actually happen? Or was this person... Like, there's a lot of my story, they say I was there, but I don't know if I was there. I've come to in a lot of parts of my story that I'm glad I went back into another blackout with that was on this list. So some of it's kind of like, it doesn't matter. If it's reoccurring or true for me, then it's on the list.
When we were finished, we considered it carefully. The first thing apparent was that this world and its people were often quite wrong.
That's true. Can I get an amen on that one? Yeah. Those sons of a bitches, all of them, right? Okay.
To conclude that others were wrong was as far as most of us got.
That was a good enough inventory, right? Did an inventory, look what they did, let's go to a meeting and share about that.
But that's actually what a lot of 4-step inventories end up looking like. It's just an inventory of the story I tell myself and how everybody else is to blame for it, right? The usual outcome was that people continued to wrong us and we stayed sore. Sometimes it was remorse, and then we were sore at ourselves.
So what's the opposite of resentment is self-pity. Once you're done with everybody else, who turns on themselves?
We do.
Right? So what they're saying here is these things are eating my lunch and I I don't have a way of dealing with it, because my way of letting go, turning it over, or acceptance is I get a notice in the mail, I put it in a drawer. And that's my idea of letting it go and acceptance. I don't deal with it, I bury it. And then what happens is life is getting me another notice, right? And then I get another notice on final payment due, right? And I get upset with them for sending me a final notice. That's like life. Life always lets us know. Life is getting ready. Life lets us know when we're not conducting ourselves in a way that's conclusive to a happy, joyous, and free. When you're not driving your car in a manner that's outlined by society. Does society let you know? People let you know. Beep your horn, beep tickets, impoundment. It gets worse. And that's the same with our lives. People, places, and things will let you know that there's conflict happening, but we can't see how it's happening, and we think they're more to blame. Remember on page 62? Remember that story when we talked about when we read, how many people read page 60, 61, 62 and thought it referred to other people? How many people knew people that should read that? That would be really beneficial if they read that selfishness and self-centeredness. And I'd be a lot happier if they just got their act together. Because I can't, we got some couples pointing at each other. So I wouldn't recommend that. No, so anyways. So you see our inability to see that, right? So now they're getting down to some pretty good stuff here, right? Get excited there. That's good.
Yeah. The usual outcome was that people continued to wrong us and we stayed sore. Sometimes it was remorse and then we were sore at ourselves. But the more we fought and tried to have our own way, the worse matters got. As in war, the victor only seemed to win. Our moments of triumph were short-lived. I've got a couple of questions. Are you open to maybe answering some?
Yeah, but it kind of answers it next, because what happens is we're barriers. We spent years as an art form of evading the truth, right? Because if we were able to see things as they were, we wouldn't have lasted as long as we did, right? So we got to the place where, like Bill in treatment for the second time, he was crushed by where his life got to and the damage and all that. Man, anybody have those moments of clarity? Just overwhelmed of where you got to and the damage you've caused with people, places, and things, and what you wouldn't give to make right. Anybody? We've all been there. That gift of desperation, that in itself is not enough to create change. Because if that was enough to create change, we would have never ended up in that spot. Because we would have seen our conduct or the way we're going and the damage it was causing. So what happens for a lot of us is we become oblivious to these things. We become numb and desensitized, right? And then when we can't, so we're able to stay away from our past. We stay ahead of it, right? And so what happens is when our presence becomes, when the pain of our presence becomes greater than the pain we're running from, then we have no other place to go but to move through this condition. If you're able to stay ahead of yourself, how many people would be doing an inventory? So the pain of our existence is greater than the pain we're running from. We cannot duck or evade anymore. We have to face, right? We have to face this thing. Sorry, go ahead.
It is plain that a life which includes deep resentment leads only to futility and unhappiness.
That's not good news, is it? Anybody ever futility and unhappiness? Anybody ever think they've dealt with something and it becomes reoccurring with the people they love or people, places, and things? They think they've dealt with the blowout like 5 years ago, and it resurfaces again, and you're having the same fight, the same battle, the same emotion. They come out of nowhere, and then your teeth grow 2 inches longer, and you start dragging your knuckles, and you got phlegm coming from your mouth, and you're screaming of something that happened 15 years ago, and everybody in the room's kind of looking at you going, what? Family reunions is always good for rehashing those things that you've forgiven everybody for, right? Okay.
To the precise extent that we permit these, do we squander the hours that might have been worthwhile?
That's interesting. You want to add on that there, Joanne? To the precise extent that we permit these? Why didn't they tell us that before?
You want me to expand on us permitting them?
Yeah. Why didn't they tell us that before?
Well, what it is they specifically mean. By to the precise extent that we permit these, do we squander the hours that might have been worthwhile? How many of you have sat down on the couch and started thinking about something that happened 10 years ago and lost 45 minutes of your day, not even knowing where your head went? Like you almost sort of transport back from this moment back to that moment 10 years ago. Even if you're not replaying the moment in the way that it actually went, you're just replaying it in your mind, is the very definition to refeel, which is the idea behind your resentment, is now you're in your past, you're stuck in your past, you're not in this moment currently. And we squander hours and days worth of time that might have been worthwhile otherwise if we were capable of being in this moment.
And you notice that you don't bring yourself in that moment, you come to in the moment, realizing you're in it. That's what they're saying, self. Your subconscious has you back in the story, that you put that tape or that recording back in, and by the time you're aware of it, you're halfway through the story. You're enriched in it. You're locked in it. You're kind of, anybody ever sit down and watch TV? A commercial comes on and then you get lost within something of your past, and you don't even know what TV show you're watching?
But even so, like, it becomes reality in the moment. If you're thinking about something that angered you 5 or 10 years ago and you replay it for a significant period of time and you come to in the moment and realize where you're at, your heart rate is up, you're sweating, you've plotted 3 murders, you know, like it's real to you in the moment. You're really feeling it in that moment.
Anxiety based?
Yeah.
So what happens here is kind of now the difference. So when you're in that moment, are you a participant or an observer?
You're a participant. You're participating in it. You're participating at a level where you're experiencing it all over again.
And do we have a recipe to get out of that on our own?
No.
So they're going to give us the recipe on how to, when these things start, how to govern it. Now they're gonna first they're gonna talk about that from it stems all forms of spiritual disease. They're going to talk about the energy around these things that we're harboring, these things that are inside that cause us all this discomfort, because all we can think of is one thing at a time. A lot of us got a lot of things we've been carrying for a lot of years that's still eating our lunch for us. It's still making our decisions at a subconscious level, but we don't know that, and that's what they're going to start to explain here.
But with the alcoholic, whose hope is the maintenance and growth of a spiritual experience, this business of resentment is infinitely grave.
Is that good? Infinitely grave. Like, this is not a good couple paragraphs so far, right? Like, right?
They follow it up by saying, we found that it is fatal.
Fatal for us means, like, is that 3-day hospital stay or a week? Because if it's a week, then it may be fatal.
Fatal means death.
Fatal.
That's it. Final.
A little dramatic, aren't they? But when you kind of look at the stuff that's been eaten, how many people are hoping that their past will be their future here? How many people still want to carry all that stuff they've been trying to get rid of? How many people still want to eat lunch, have lunch with all those people inside you that's been eating your lunch for you for years now? But who's calling the family reunion? You don't even know it. You walk into a room and you're there and hey, glad you're here. We've been waiting for you. Let's go through it again. When you're done with one, you go back to living your day, say, oh, God, I'm glad that's done. Now I can go back. How many people go to another one? And a worse one, and a worse one, and a worse one. How many people's story in their brain gets better as a result of them participating in it? And then pretty soon you're at a funeral, either yours or somebody else's. Anybody? And you're living it. You're like, yeah. Living the dream. Then you go to a meeting talking about how the promises are taking place. And you have acceptance and serenity. And you've never been happier. Sorry. Go ahead.
Are you done?
Yeah, I had a moment there. I'm done. I'm back. Go ahead.
For when harboring such feelings, we shut ourselves off from the sunlight of the spirit. The insanity of alcohol returns. And we drink again.
Not the obsession, the insanity, the malady. Right?
Well, why does it return? Why does it return? The preceding sentence is really important. When we're engaging in this stuff, when we're participating in this stuff, we're shutting ourselves off from the sunlight of the spirit. It's actually the fast track to disconnection from this power source, right? Is to participate or engage in this resentment. And when we shut ourselves off from the sunlight of the spirit, the insanity returns because we're disconnected from the power source.
You have
and with us, to drink is to die.
You have any experience with that, Joe?
Oh, yeah. I've permitted many of those things without a solution that led me back to an insane idea to drink or a foolish decision.
And the reason why we permit is because we have no other alternative but to allow it to happen. It's like a home invasion.
Without defense.
You have no way of dealing with it. So it determines how you think, feel, and what happens.
Driven by it. Driven.
The bondage of self.
Yeah, 100%.
Well, it's another way of them confirming, again, that we're not here to keep ourselves sober. We don't have a way to keep ourselves from engaging in these resentments, but they're going to give us the recipe for overcoming these resentments so that we don't get shut off from the power source, right?
Here's that if. It's the biggest word in the book. It starts with one idea here, and then the if means we're going to give you the opposite way of looking at it. All the way through this book, it's the big. As soon as if shows up, it means pay attention to what they were saying and where they're going. If is the biggest word in this book. Go ahead.
If we were to live, we had to be free of anger. The grouch and the brainstorm were not for us. They may be the dubious luxury of normal men, but for alcoholics, these things are poison.
From it stems all forms of spiritual disease. From what? From the resentments.
We turn back to the list, for it held the key to the future. We were prepared to look at it from an entirely different angle. We began to see that the world and its people really dominated us. In that state, the wrongdoing of others, fancied or real, had power to actually kill.
Is that true? How many people bought into a story here and you believed it, man? You put it all on the line and then you found out it wasn't even true. How many people started a story in their head and waited for their partner to come home so you could finish it?
Oh, not even finish it. You spent a few hours filling in the blanks yourself, and when your partner walked in the door, he didn't know what hit him. Or her.
Yeah, that's
that a frying pan, Joanne?
That's carrying the message. So that's what most sponsors say to sponsees. Says, I realize that you're letting me in on a conversation that you've been having all day, but can you let me in on the whole conversation? I'm just coming in through this midstream, and I know you're worked up, but can we back up to where it started? Yeah. Well, when I was 6, no, I meant today. Right, Joe?
We're experts on filling in the blanks, right? We're mind readers. We know exactly what's going on while we weren't around.
Oh, yeah. How many people's... It's easier to see when someone else does it. How many people's walked up to you and they're right in the middle of a conversation. Like they got this whole story going and they think you know about what they're thinking, feeling, and what they're talking to you. You're kind of going, what the hell are you talking about? They go, you know. No, I don't know. Can you let me out?
It's the internal dialogue that's with us constantly, right? It's the conversation that you're already having with the person in your mind on your way to meet them. And this poor person has no idea, hasn't participated in this conversation at all. You walk into the greeting, the person says, how are you? Fine. The person has absolutely no idea that they've participated in some sort of confrontation that took place in your head.
So is that a participant or an observer?
That's a participant.
And most of us are participants thinking, but we're observing the resentment, right? As a participant. It's determining our next course of action based on this truth that we're telling ourselves, and we can't shake it, get rid of it. It's driving us. Okay?
We turn back to the list. We were prepared to look at it from an entirely different angle. We began to see that the world and its people really dominated us. In that state, the wrongdoing of others, fancied or real, had the power to actually kill.
You're using some pretty serious language here, eh?
Well, how could we escape? We saw that these resentments must be mastered, but how? We could not wish them away any more than alcohol. So they're confirming that we can't keep ourselves sober. And we don't have the power to keep ourselves from being resentful either.
And we bury it, thinking we've dealt with it. We bury it. We just put it in its compartments inside. And the more compartments within us, the more blocked off we get. And the darker it gets within inside of ourselves. And most of us become like most people who get sober. Nobody in this group have anger issues. Anybody think, I have anger issues? You're a walking time bomb. What you do is you step on these landmines inside of yourself. You have this explosion. You don't know what to do with the energy, and it turns into hand grenades. You start taking right? Casualties around you. The collateral damage that starts to happen. Punching holes in the wall, throwing things, losing your shit. You don't even have to have other people in the room to start losing your shit. How many people get to a stage where you think, now it's cool because you got the Bluetooth. You be walking along going, are you kidding me? And you're talking to you, but nobody else knows. How many people been there? Got more phlegm on the inside of the windshield than the outside. You're bending the steering wheel, and it's just you talking to you.
Oh,
right?
man.
Anybody?
Yeah.
And it's funny because the energy gets so loud, it has to dissipate. Right? I'm trying not to swear, but I get like, it's almost like a mild form of Tourette start happening. Anybody? Anybody ever ask you, like my wife sometimes will go, you okay, I'm in another room, and I'm going like, are you kidding me? And I'm just having this whole conversation in my mind. She goes, what's the matter? Nothing, it's a personal conversation with me and these three people who won't leave me alone. Used to be a bus, now it's only three of them, right? They're ganging up on me, right?
Used to be a bus.
It used to be a busload of them. Anyway, so we see the first part of the resentment in the inventory is I need to learn how to master resentment. So it's a form of spiritual martial arts, right? So we see that this energy is killing me and it's imploding in myself and it's determining my life. So I need to take this energy and I need to reshift it, redefine it, or move it into new directions where it works toward my betterment instead of my demise. And that's what they talked about on page 64 here. Fact-finding, fact-facing process. To get rid of the stuff that's not working, repackage it, reformulate it, and move towards something that is working. So now they're going to give me the recipe on how to master resentments here. What am I doing with all this energy or this story? Right? Because letting go and acceptance and surrender isn't working. If it did work, then I wouldn't need to be here. I'm poisoning myself. I need to find a way to be free of these things.
This was our course.
I had a moment there. I'm back.
No, it was a good moment. But we want to know what their course was.
So what's those two little dots? This was our course. What do those two little dots mean?
That's a colon.
What does that mean?
They're going to explain something. They're going to explain something.
Okay, that means they're going to explain something? I didn't know what that meant. Okay, good. Remember, I got a PhD in street.
Yeah, but you're married to somebody who's got their master's in English.
That's right, because I didn't have time to get an education. I married one. Okay, go ahead. She has her master's. See that wall up there? See what I argue with? Look at that wall. Master's in English. Like, when she starts, I know when I'm in trouble. When she starts using words I don't even understand what she's saying. I just get busy in my house, man. I gotta say this. Since you brought up the other day, she says, quit knocking the clothes around. I said, I'm not knocking. There's no clothes. What are you talking? She says, the covers. I said, this is not clothes. She gets out the Google dictionary. The covers for a bed are called clothes. How many people knew that? That's what I'm married to. Anyways, I love her with all my heart. Go ahead. Joanne's a type A personality. So this is how I master resentments now. When she says that stuff, well, this is what Google says. I pray. Here's my recipe.
I'll give you some homework. Why don't you ask her what a colon means and let us all know?
I know what I thought colon means, but it's a different kind of colon.
No, not that kind of colon.
Okay.
Not the full of shit colon.
That's what. Remember, my sponsor used to say, the best thing we could do when working with people is, what does this mean to you? What does this? And then you tell them what you think it means, and they said, no, this is what it means. Because they read all this stuff. I never knew what none of it meant. So my sponsor would go, how do you interpret, what does this mean to you? I tell them what it means. He said, no, that's not what it means. This is what it means. I go, oh, okay. So, okay, anyways.
Okay, this was our course. So when they're referring to our course, where they're talking, of course, to our founding members, the first 100 men and women. We realized that people who wronged us were perhaps spiritually sick. Though we did not like their symptoms and the way these disturbed us, they, like ourselves, were sick too. We asked God to help us show the same tolerance, pity, and patience that we would cheerfully grant a sick friend. When a person offended, we said to ourselves, this is a sick man. How can I be helpful to him? God, save me from being angry. Thy will be done.
The way I was shown how to do this is when a conversation comes up in my brain and these people start showing up in my thinking, I correct it there. I corrected in my thinking. So my stepdad, who I had a deep resentment, he was probably one of the meanest people I ever met in my life. The guy was out of the Second World War. He escaped from the Nazi regime without getting in. He was an atheist. He was one of the meanest people I ever met in my life. I used to... Anyways, the damage he inflicted on our family. So when I went through this inventory and he would come to mind again, I'd be stuck to the story. So here I do the third step prayer, I back off from there, and then I apply this prayer to this person, place, or thing, and I look at them differently. What don't I like about them? Well, based on his story, based on his life, he was selfish, inconsiderate, and dishonest. Based on what? Based on his social security, based on his instincts, he involved me in his story, right? It didn't matter who it was. Anybody in this person's proximity would have the same kind of outcome. So I realized it may sound weird, but it wasn't personal. Any family he got involved with, those people would have felt the same kind of effect. So I was able to separate it, that it wasn't personal. So I started subsiding those emotions and my attachment to this person. And this is just one thing. God saved me from being angry, where internally I started changing the story. I didn't say what they did was all right, but I started to change the story in association with them. So when it came to one day making amends for my part for dropping a record player, like I used to torment the hell out of him to get even, I was able to make amends for my part and not look at his part because I was free from all that and I had compassion for him based on the life that he had. It may sound kind of weird, but I was able to be free from it. He no longer sat at my dinner table with me internally eating my lunch or my dinner for me anymore. I was able to keep him compartmentalized where he needed to be. So as I became an observer now, so before, it's like anybody ever sit in a big stereo with surround sound? And it's too loud where it becomes uncomfortable. You can't even see what's on the screen. And this is like the fourth step, is that emotional thing inside is so loud you can't even deal with. Here we get detachment from it by turning down the volume. So it becomes operable, so you could stand the sound, and then you start stepping back from it where you become an observer of it on the screen, right? And then pretty soon you're able, when it comes up, there's no volume, you're able to change the channel to a new story, how you look at this thing. Does that kind of make sense? That's what they're saying here. Now I'm changing the story, not of what happened, but the way I look at it so I can be free from it. That's pretty cool stuff, right? Because a lot of us have a lot of experiences with some pretty horrific things. It didn't mean you forgive them, but I need to find a way that I could have freedom from it. And this is the start.
When a person, though we did not like their symptoms and the way these disturbed us, they, like ourselves, were sick too. We asked God to help us show the same tolerance, pity, and patience that we would cheerfully grant a sick friend. When a person offended, we said to ourselves, "This is a sick man. How can I be helpful to him? God, save me from being angry. Thy will be done." We avoid retaliation or argument.
And where's that retaliation and argument happening, people?
Internally.
When you think of all those resentment people, how many people has gone over it again and punished them another way, or more retaliation, gone over an argument, gone over a thing? To the extent that we permit these things. How many people has gone over, well, let me beat them one more time a different way. Let me do it like we make them pay or go over an argument and we say things. I wish I would have said this. I wish I would have said that. And we're there and we're feeling all that vile. Anybody with those people, and they're not even in the room. You're revisiting again. Here they're saying,
right, it's not enough to not just physically retaliate. If you're internally retaliating, you're still experiencing the resentment. We need something that works internally for us. We wouldn't treat sick people that way. If we do, we destroy our chance of being helpful. We cannot be helpful to all people, but at least God will show us how to take a kindly and tolerant view of each and every one.
So now we've shifted from the participant to the observer. I see this resurfacing. I acknowledge it's resurfacing. I step back from it, and I do the third step prayer because it involves me. If it involves another human being, I do the prayer on page 67, which is the resentment prayer. So I have the third step prayer for me, and I have the resentment prayer for people, places, and things. Between these two prayers, I should start getting to subside some of these things. Get it so it's bite-sized. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. But here you're bringing God into it, where you're severing most of that out, okay?
Referring to our list again. So now we're in, column 4?
Yep. So we're going to look at the final column here, right?
Column 4, what is the exact nature of my wrongs? Referring to our list again, putting out of our minds the wrongdoings of others, or wrongs others have done, we resolutely looked for our own mistakes. Where had we been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened? Though a situation has not been entirely our fault, we tried to disregard the other person involved entirely. Should we explain what that means?
We'll just kind of finish this through here, yeah.
Okay. Where were we to blame? The inventory was ours, not the other man's. When we saw our faults, we listed them. We placed them before us in black and white. We admitted our wrongs honestly, and were willing to set these matters straight.
See, this is a hard one because most of us go to that situation where there's abuse involved or a horrific situation. We get stuck on part of our story where we can't go. How many people went to that hurdle right away? Went to that person, place, or thing where they have struggle with. Right? See how the mind works as an observer. It's interesting. It's asking you to look at something. You have all this, but right away we go to the stumbling block. Right? So my stumbling block was with this Peter, my stepdad. He used to beat me within an inch of my life. The guy was brutal. So when I looked at the story, I'd get justified and all that other stuff. So we're talked about where I was selfish, inconsiderate, self-seeking, and frightened. I kind of went, whoa. But then now I had to look at my story, and as a kid, well, most of it, 90% of it, but how did I set the ball rolling in some of it? Well, some of it, I was selfish in some of the things, my conduct, right, without getting in it. Some of the stuff I was engaged in was inconsiderate, right, or self-seeking and frightened, or, self-seeking and dishonest. So it's kind of interesting. So what's a good example? Kim, this girl I went out with a long time ago, when I went across a thing, it says, how did I set the ball rolling? I wasn't selfish. Well, yeah, I already knew about this person before I got involved with it, but it didn't matter because I got my self-esteem, personal relationship, because Kim was the hottest thing around. But with her came a lot of baggage. But it didn't matter because of the reputation and the self-esteem. I got a lot of security from my involvement with her. So now, but it caused me a lot of pain. A huge amount of pain. What started the ball rolling? I knew the truth based on other things, but it didn't matter to me because I wanted what I wanted. So what caused this? Looking at it from an entirely different view would be from right to left. I've been doing my inventory from left to right. So, if I wasn't selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, frightened, and inconsiderate, would I have gotten involved with Kim?
No.
So, based on my instincts, I placed myself in a position to be hurt. So, some of these things that happened in my life, the first time it happened, shame on them. When I didn't tell nobody about it, it became my problem. And it's hard to look at, but fear kept me in a lot of different situations. What got me into situations was my self-esteem, right? I got involved with certain people, places, and things. What led to my demise when I got involved in that group, these people other than AA, right? When I got involved with these people, what got me there was my personal relationships, my self-esteem, my material, my emotional. So I got a pack mentality within this group I got involved with that later turned to my demise. So when I look back on it, what got me involved in that situation? So when I look back, well, most of these things, I see self, by me obtaining something from it, I got something from it. And when I seen the truth from it and I didn't act on it, why didn't I act on it? What kept me in that situation? Right? So it was like, why did I stay with this person so long? Because they helped pay the rent. Why did I stay with this person so long? Because the sex was really good. Why did I stay with this person? Well, you know what? Let's get real, right? Why were you so mad at this person? Because they didn't give me the love and attention that I needed. Why with your mom? Why were you so angry with your mom? Well, I didn't like the symptoms she exhibited. What was the symptom? The selfishness, dishonesty, right? The way she treated me. Well, why did she treat me? Now I look at because of her instincts, because of the way she was raised, where she came from. She couldn't help doing what she did. Like myself. They talk about like myself. They were sick too. When I seen what I did, and I couldn't help but doing what I did, and what I did to people, places, it wasn't personal for the most part. Anybody in my path would have got the same result. Does that kind of make sense? So when I see my mom, my dad, and these people, what they did to me, I realize based on my instincts and based on my condition, I place myself in a position for those things to happen. And for those things that happened that I couldn't help but happen because where I was raised, I seen these people were sick based on their life, based on their instincts, and based on the things that happened to them, that I was just a part of collateral damage. Anybody have that kind of story here? So I need to be free of those things so these things aren't eating my lunch anymore. And where they talk about here, where it talks about that, we placed them before us in black and white. We admitted our wrongs honestly. Didn't mean the situation was okay. That's not what they're saying. It means, how did I keep the story going? Right? And a lot of times, even though I didn't have a part in it, me being stuck to the story is a form of dishonesty. Because I'm still saying this thing that happened 15 years ago is still determining my story today is a form of dishonesty because I'm allowing it. I'm making an excuse. It's harsh, but I used to say, I'm this way because look at my story. My sponsor said, no, you're this way because you haven't put the effort in to have a different story. You're stuck to your story. That's why you haven't changed. This is the recipe for change. So when they say here, we admitted our wrong honestly and we're willing to set these matters straight. What are they talking about?
Most people would actually, at this point, start drifting into thought about making amends. And that's not what they're talking about. What they're talking about is setting these matters straight internally within us.
Am I willing to set these matters straight? Am I willing to look at it differently? Am I willing to apply these prayers to these sick son of a bitches? And it's okay to look at it that way in the beginning. It's a willingness to change. A lot of us think, I got to go from this one flip-flop into this pure white as snow. I mean, it's a willingness to still be swearing as you pray. At least you're praying. It may sound kind of weird, but it's a shift. If you've gone from only beating them half the time and then doing a prayer, you didn't go through the whole story, right? It's the stopping of the story. Am I willing to change the story so I can be free? It's progress. We claim spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. So do I have to go through the whole dismay of the self-pity, the crying and the budget and lying down with a big tub of ice cream? Or can I stop it before I get to that stage by applying spiritual principles? Can I change the story? That when I think of these people, it doesn't give me anxiety, pain, and anguish. They're not changing my life anymore when they come to mind. Can I think about them without detachment? And what that kind of means is, a lot of us, you ever hear people at a podium talk about forgiveness? The topic of forgiveness? And they go on 20 minutes about all the people they've forgiven? If you're still talking about every time anybody ever did, I caught myself once. I remember going to my wife, look I've forgiven you for this, this, and this. And then I realized I did. If you're still mentioning it, then you haven't forgiven them. I'm alone with that one, right? To forgive somebody means you never mention it again. You don't use it as an example of how great you are. Oh, and that's what this is about. Am I willing to set these matters straight to be free of them? You want to add anything to that, Joe?
No, I'm good.
Joe?
Good. Joe?
He's muted. Okay, so I guess he's doing something.
That's 5 minutes for us.
So did you want to talk about the seventh tradition and stuff like that? These talks will be online. Is there any questions that you wanted to revisit on the chat?
No, I think we're good. We covered everything. There's nothing glaring.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
I'm actually just going to unmute Kimberly, who's who's the remote communities chair for District 40. This is the remote communities account for District 40 that we actually use. They've been gracious enough to allow us to tag onto their account to put on the Big Book study. And I'm just going to unmute her so she can talk about the 7th tradition. Kimberly? Are you there?
Hello, how are you guys?
Hey, sister. Thanks for having us in your homes, everybody. Please stay for this part of it. As responsible AA members, please don't leave yet.
Yeah, so the 7th tradition states that each group is self-supporting through our own contributions, and groups are still having to pay their expenses. So for the Big Book workshop, which is normally held in Vancouver, they still have obligations to pay rent. And so as we are hosting them here on our Zoom, we are opening up our 7th tradition for them as well. And we voted, and we are going to be covering their expenses to keep them going when we're allowed out of our homes. So we would appreciate if y'all would donate to the 7th tradition on behalf of the group, both so we can support their expenses as well as the 4 levels of service. The 4 levels of service are very important to keep the doors of AA open. We need to, pay the rent for the general service office as well as our local intergroups, and pay for the literature that is still being mailed out. The phones are being manned, and obviously we have to have our internet bill paid because everything is being run remotely. So yeah, it's time to do the Zoom. I know. But yeah, so I posted the link in the chat. It's a PayPal account, and we did a split in March, and we donated over $1,200 to the 4 levels of service, and then we are covering the expenses for the Big Book workshop as well. So thank you guys so much. Oh, and to clarify, I had a few text messages. I didn't know you and Tony dated because I have an ex named Tony and you have an ex named Kim.
Don't get me in trouble here. Easy.
I'm like, no.
That's not weird at all.
Not weird at all. So
No, I was like, no, don't text.
And remember, everybody, we got the YouTube talks. This talk will be up tonight or tomorrow. You can follow along if you've missed the previous 7 talks, and the worksheets are there to be downloaded. Also, our emails and sponsees are putting up their information if anybody's looking for temp sponsorship or anybody to guide them through the book.
Anybody finding this helpful? Anybody enjoying this? Right on. Thank you for allowing us to be of service and stuff like that. And what we're going to actually do now, because we've gone through the 3rd step, we're going to close with the 3rd step prayer, if that's okay with everybody. So what makes this all possible? And what we need to make it possible? God.
I
offer myself to thee, to build with me and to do with me as thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those that would help, thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. May they always live long and prosperous, and we'll see you next week, my friends.
Thanks, guys.
Awesome. And for those who want